فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hey everyone, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Islamic Mary podcast. So for today, I want to speak about the fact that my book, The Islamic Mary, Maryam Through the Centuries, is now available for pre-order. So this is super exciting for me. I've been working on this book for several years, and it's awesome to see the book cover and its description now on Fortress Press's website, as well as that of Amazon. And I'm also really happy to see that it was this last week a number one new release in Women in Islam, as well as a number one new release in Muhammad in Islam. So this book will come out September 9th, and it will be available in the fall. So it's an opportunity for people to pre-order the book and then get it right when it comes out. So for today, I want to speak a little bit about its introduction. And I wrote this introduction about several months ago, and then it's still very much relevant today, about why I wrote the book and why it's still very much relevant and important. So I began by saying, I belong to the 9/11 generation that grew up in the 90s, but came of age in the early 2000s, and witnessed war, conflict, and religious misunderstanding. I remember being a boy when the Persian Gulf War started and the first images were broadcast on cable news. I participated in rallies to end the genocide in Bosnia and helped Bosnian refugees relocate here in the United States. I was a student at Georgetown University when 9/11 happened and felt the impact of the event on my life and career. During this time, a renewed emphasis on the clash of civilizations thesis appeared. In 1993, Samuel Huntington famously declared that one of the next threats after the fall of communism would be the green threat instead of the communist red one. According to Huntington, the next conflicts would be between civilizations with similar histories, cultures, and religions. He believed that the next world war, if there was one, will be a war between civilizations. In this new world, it would be the West versus the rest, and Western civilization needed to bond together and quell internal strife to thwart external threats and nemesis. Within this scheme, Islam had its own civilization and provided a potential threat to the West alongside the Confucian civilization of China. As Huntington famously declared, Islam had bloody borders, and there was a historic and intrinsic conflict between Islam and the West. But a counter-narrative developed that conflict between Islam and the West was not inevitable, and that the various civilizations and religions could live in peace and coexistence. This narrative built on the previous intellectual efforts that saw Ibrahim, as a common figure between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, who could unite the various religious traditions in an age of war and conflict. The great religions shared scripture, ethics, and the idea of monotheism, and overlapped in terms of values and culture. Some even suggested that the modern conflicts were akin to a family feud or sibling rivalry, as the different religions returned to the same father, Abraham, and were part of a larger family. However, a series of books emerged critiquing this notion of Ibrahim, and how he was portrayed in the public discourse, as well as in interfaith and interreligious studies. The authors admitted that Abraham was shared among various religions, but they understood him in different ways and with their own theology and religious understandings. The various attempts at Abrahamic religions often glossed over these differences and at times suggested creating a new religion, rather than respecting the multiple traditions and their unique histories. While global peace and understanding among the world religions is a noble idea, creating a neutral Abraham could do more harm than good and potentially generate more misunderstanding and mistrust. While the term Abrahamic still holds currency, new books have emerged discussing the Islamic Mary or Maryam. These books build upon the ecumenical spirit of the early discussions on Abraham, but highlight a new figure who opens innovative possibilities regarding Christian-Muslim relations, spirituality, and women and religion, whereas Abraham represents the classic patriarch with his sons Ishmael, Ismail, and Isaac, Ishaq, fathering the great religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Maryam represents a woman, a mother, and a spiritual figure who has inspired millions throughout the centuries. The emphasis on Maryam also highlights the importance of Christian-Muslim relations in the world today and in the future. According to a Pew poll, Christians and Muslims will be roughly the same number by 2050 and make up over half the world's population. As a 2007 A Common Word letter begins, without peace and justice between these two religions, there can be no meaningful peace in the world today. The future of the world depends on peace between Muslims and Christians. In other words, international peace is highly dependent on peace between Christians and Muslims, and their interaction will have global consequences. Yet the scholarly emphasis on Maryam is aware of the critiques made against Abraham and Abrahamic religions, and largely avoids trying to create a neutral Mary, but instead seeks to better understand how she operates in the different religions. Thus, within this backdrop, I began the book on the Islamic Mary, or Maryam. Like those before, I seek to better understand Maryam in the Islamic tradition, hoping she can be a source of religious history, ecumenism, and spirituality. Nonetheless, unlike other works, I don't only look at her through the Quran, but also examine how she appears throughout history, such as within prophetic reports, theology, mysticism, art, and modernity. In many ways, the Quranic portrayals motivate various Muslim engagements with Maryam throughout time and place up until the contemporary period. Maryam continues to inspire Muslim communities with her name given to daughters, her Quranic chapter read in mosque, and her story shared in countless classes and sermons. But her history is still just beginning to be explored, and her full potential is just starting to be realized. So that was my introduction for the book, The Islamic Mary. And as you heard, I began talking about my personal history. So I'm someone who was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and then came of age in the early 2000s. And during this period, this was a time of growth and renewal and the internet and the idea of streaming and Wi-Fi. But it was also a time of religious misunderstanding. So I still remember vividly cable news and the Persian Gulf War starting, me meeting people from Bosnia and helping them relocate. And then, of course, 9/11, where I was actually a student on the campus of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., one of the sites that was attacked a couple of miles away in the Pentagon. And during this time, there was this idea of this war, right? This war against terror. And many felt it was a war against Islam, that we had to fight against Islam, we had to fight against Muslims. Personally, I know people whose houses were raided, my mosque was vandalized, and there was a lot of religious profiling and informants. So during this scary time, there was this large movement against this idea of making Islam and Muslims the enemy. And this started in communities as well as university. And they often drew upon Abraham. Abraham was this figure that was going to unite us all. And this arguably returns back to the 20th century with Louis Massignon, who was a Catholic scholar who lived in Muslim lands and had a deep reverence for Islam and Muslims and strongly believed in Christian-Muslim relations. So instead of this idea of Judeo-Christian values, there was this idea of Abrahamic, that we could include Islam and Muslims within the West, and that the West was building off of Islamic civilization. But there was this skepticism, and while people believed Abraham could unite people, and there were various initiatives such as scriptural reasoning and other interreligious interfaith initiatives, there was also this idea that Abraham was actually different, that every religion had a different Abraham. Jews believed in an Abraham that supported the children of Israel. Christians believed in Abraham that foreshadowed the coming of Christ. Islam believed in Abraham that was monotheistic and foretold the coming of the Prophet Muhammad. So Abraham was actually a divisive figure. And we actually need to study Abraham and understand how he operated within these various religions. And in this time period, I wrote a lot on Abraham. I wrote about how Abraham was an iconoclast in the Quran. I also wrote about the sacrifice story of Abraham. I was someone who taught about Abrahamic religions, and I often spoke about the sacrifice story within Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But the last couple of years, I've seen a shift, and this shift has focused more on Maryam. And Maryam is someone who represents so much. So Abraham is this classic patriarch. His sons lead to the creation of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But Maryam is different. And Maryam, first and foremost, she is a woman. She is a mother and a spiritual figure. So when we examine Maryam, many issues relating to women and issues relating to mothers emerge, and we can see how we can learn and benefit from that. We also see this idea of the importance of Christian-Muslim relations. So Christianity is growing, Islam is growing, and Maryam highlights this relationship between the two religions. And as I mentioned, in 2050, when I'm hopefully retired on an island somewhere, the world will be roughly the same number of Muslims and Christians. So the question is, what are we doing to prepare for that world and the world of today, where many of the conflicts center around Christians and Muslims and different understandings of faith, as well as tangible resources such as land and water. So in this shift, I've seen more folks writing about Maryam, whether that be in Christian-Muslim relations, Maryam in the Quran, and that influenced my own work, where I was someone who has 3 daughters, 3 sisters, no sons, no brothers, and grew up in a family of very strong spiritual and pious women. So how has this history impacted me, right? It's impacted me and also exploring Maryam. But in this book, I was very intentional that I didn't want this book to be only about Maryam in the Quran. I found that Maryam touched all aspects of Islam. So whether that be the Quran, where you have an entire chapter named after her, she's the only woman explicitly mentioned. There are many women in the Quran, but she is unique in that regard. And there is a special emphasis on her role, even to the point that some scholars said she was a prophet because she had this close, intimate connection with the divine. I also saw that she was connected in hadith, in the prophetic reports, that the Prophet Muhammad mentioned her among the best women, and that she was sometimes even better than that of Fatima, his daughter, his wife, Khadija, as well as other Abrahamic women such as Asiya, who was the wife of Pharaoh. I saw that she was discussed in theology, that some said she was a waliya, that she was a friend of God, that she was a saint. While others said, no, she's a Nabiya, she's a prophet. She's someone that had direct communication with God, and she was actually better than other male prophets. I found that she was discussed in mysticism, Sufism. And in that discussion, many scholars and lay people found inspiration in her example. The famous Arabiya Adawiya, she saw in Maryam an example for herself, a single celibate woman whose only desire in the world is to get close to God. We also see that Rumi mentions her in his poetry and sees her as a model, that all of us are trying to bring what we have within ourselves to the world. And she's everywhere also in Islamic art, that yes, Islamic art is beautiful and it's calligraphy and it's architecture, but we also see representations of Maryam. One of the most beloved, and you can see this on the cover of the book, is of her shaking the palm tree. So as she laments and as she mentions that she wished she had died and been forgotten, all this, the divine voice tells her to shake a palm tree. And as she shakes the palm tree, it descends upon her ripe dates, and this provides her nourishment. So the idea of someone in difficulty and hardship seeking the transcendent, seeking the divine, and finding nourishment. And I also found her in contemporary times. Many of the things I study, such as Ibn Kathir and tafsir literature, You find them important within medieval times. But Maryam transcends time and place. She's not something or someone who is only found within history, but contemporary people find her meaningful and inspiring. We see that there are shared visions of her in Egypt, that both Christians and Muslims believe that they saw her emerge and that she provided hope to them after war and conflict. We see that Maryam is important in terms of shared pilgrimage sites. The Virgin House of Mary in Turkey is one of those places Christians and Muslims both do pilgrimage to and pray and find hope and meaning. We also see that feminists have looked at Maryam and see her as a model of someone who can speak to gender equality and social justice. So Maryam is someone who speaks to all aspects of Islam, whether that be the Quran, the Hadith, theology, mysticism, art, or modern understandings. She is someone that is very dynamic and influential. So I want to make sure to talk about all aspects that touch upon Maryam. And of course, my work is just the beginning. There's been amazing work that I reference in the book itself. But at the same time, more work needs to be done on Maryam. And as I mentioned, her history is still just beginning to be explored, and her full potential is just starting to be realized. I really feel that Maryam provides so much potential, whether that be in understanding scripture, like the Hadith, like the Quran, like the Bible, which sometimes is difficult, especially for students and young people to understand and grasp, but also its potential in interreligious and interfaith understanding between people of different faiths, Christians and Muslims in particular, and also questions of gender. That's one of the key topics of my students and people I engage with, is understanding the role of women in religion. What is the relationship between men and women? And how do we identify ourselves as believers or as seekers or as people who are trying to understand the transcendent? So thanks so much for listening to the Islamic Mary podcast. I encourage you to subscribe, encourage your friends, students, and colleagues to listen in as well. Feel free to text me, email me your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions. You can review this podcast, which would help others find this work. And you can visit my website and join my newsletter, which I'll keep updating folks on the publication of the Islamic Mary. I would encourage all of you to consider ordering it and telling other people about it. I'm looking forward for it to actually come out in print. It's September 9th. Thanks once again, and take care.